for the end of the day, sticking around. Hopefully everybody here is excited to learn a little bit more about events, or at least have questions thrown at me and have me strangely humiliated by not actually being able to answer that very question. But please ask. My name is Norm Kirchner. I am not in LabVIEW R&D. I'm actually a senior RF systems engineer, but I love LabVIEW, and I love the program, and I love to share it. I do have to warn you to start that this is going to be coming fast and furious at you. This is the fire hose up here, and open your mouths because it's coming at you. There's a lot to talk about in this everything. I put the asterisk in the wrong place. It should have been everything star because there's just too much to talk about. So first off, events. If you don't like events and think you should pull every button in your system and every action, and this is horse hockey, I'm sorry to tell you, but this is not for you. So, a brief history lesson, just because it's good to know where you came from. Okay, so in the beginning, we had LabVIEW before 6.1. They had no events. Every time you wanted to know what happened in your system, you had to actually pull the buttons. LabVIEW 6.1 came along, we were given the event structure. The event structure allowed us to respond to user interface events, button clicks, mouse overs, and a couple different things. But that was about the extent of it. Then LabVIEW 7 Express came along, and we were actually able to use a hidden feature that was on this diagram. Did anybody actually in LabVIEW 6.1 recognize on the right-click menu that there was like this little grayed-out option for C dynamic event terminals on there? Wondering what they could do? So that's what happened in LabVIEW 7. We were given dynamic events, dynamically registered events, and user events as well in the system. Then LabVIEW 8 came along, and we all want to forget about that, and LabVIEW 8.2.0 came along. And we got a little bit more in terms of usage of .NET. So we could actually call, much like ActiveX, but now we could do respond to .NET events in the overall ecosystem of the LabVIEW ecosphere. And then finally, LabVIEW 2013 is coming out, and years upon years of waiting, we have new things in the event structure and things that we can do, which are fantastic. We can now have the ability, and we'll get into just a little bit of this and talk about the presentations later this week that will dive deeper into these things, but like flushing events, priority events, being able to probe an event structure, and also scripting of events as well. So these are things that, well, I'm going into events in the grander scheme of things. The specifics of 2013 are later this week with Mike Aveliotis. So, a bit of nomenclature. I want to make sure that we can all talk on the same level and get things like we're talking the same language here. So, first off, there's a programmatic breakdown of how we can categorize events. There are statically registered events and dynamically registered events. You can't, well, let's get into the example and just kind of talk about it from there. Okay. So, very simple BI. All that's here is a statically registered, well actually I haven't even statically registered yet. There we go, let's go ahead and right click. I'm going to statically register something for an event. We've all done this before, just want to get the name down. I'm going to say vertical pointer slide 1, value change, good to go. I'm going to go ahead and change what I'm reading out here. Fantastic. Statically registered. Okay? And then there is dynamically registered, which, if you have not imagined, So, there's our structure, and now we have gone through the process of dynamically registering vertical pointer slider 2 using the dynamic registration node, and now that is registered, that event structure is now registered for the dynamically registered event. So double registration. So once again, we run it. No surprise, no surprise. Who here has not done a lot of dynamic registration of events? It's okay. Okay, perfect. So there's a smattering here, so somebody's getting something out of this. It's good. So this is the basic idea, but you can tell this has a lot less code than this does. So what's the benefit out of you doing this? Well, in order for me to kind of flip the scales and have the sliders go to the other charts, over here I have to very purposefully so right-click, edit events handled by this case, change it to that, and change that over. It's not the end of the world, but once again, there's like this manual interaction process. Versus something that I can do programmatically I'm going to pretend this is a case structure here. And so now I just simply change the reference going into that dynamic node. That's changing that one. And that's changing that. So it's a slight improvement in terms of the static registration and the dynamic registration. But now we can take it one step further. And just a quick note, this VI right here is a little bit of scripting. All it does is it opens a reference to something by name on your front panel. Just trust me on that one? No. It does, it's not even mine. But the long story short is that I have that input right there that I still have. Well, actually, let's go ahead and flip these back around so it makes more sense here. And so now we have, I have registered dynamically based off of name, but I can actually go ahead and change this over here. And so that's great, that's fantastic. Now I have a nice little programmatic way of changing that structure. Or I can do something even neater, where I can actually build an array of those things based off of 2 of them. And now it's registered for 2 things. For those of you who didn't realize, this is one of those neat little features where you can actually send an array of individual front panel controls, VI references, so on and so forth, into this node and actually respond to either one of those. Kind of handy. We'll get into more of that later. But if we really want to take it one step further over the edge, I could even go to this idea, because we've only been talking about, all that I've been doing is statically registering dynamic events. So we're really not getting that much out of that. But in this very scenario, what I've done is I've gone and I've done that same registration, but 2 seconds later, I'm going to go ahead and change my registration to something else. So I'm going to dynamically, at runtime, while the program's running, change the registration. And so by default, I should only be doing slider point 2, and after 4 seconds, it should go to both 1 and 2. So running. And now it's using 2 of them. So at runtime, I've taken that registration node, given it new references, and it has dynamically re-registered other things for that very same event that event structure here is already set up to handle. Clear so far? So once. Technology. So that's the difference between the. What's that?
The technology is not ready for time.
You know what? I'm an early adopter. I'm going to try to cross the chasm without falling headfirst into it. Now we have this other idea of type classification. So once again, we're trying to talk. Thumbs off. But we have this idea of type classification. So we have the user interface and user events. We want to make sure that we've got these down straight so when we're talking we know what's up. They are apples and oranges. These user events should almost just say programmatic events, but I think somebody in R&D said we can't call them programmatic events. So basic idea, this is user interacting with the system. And then there's that, which is I'm going to fire events. System events are things like operating system is trying to close down, so it's received something that nobody's even touched your program. Notify and filter events. Does anybody not know what a filter event is? It's okay? Okay. So there's a difference that we'll get into in just a second with that. And then for those of you who didn't know, actually I should just open up the VI here. So we have, let's see, talking about user events, programmatic events. This is what I was just talking about, where you can, if you didn't know, you can actually take a DACMX handle and wire it into that very same node. So you're dynamically registering an I/O event in the system. It's a pretty handy thing. I don't know what the avenue is, whether that list is growing or not for different pieces of hardware and what's possible for different hardware. But if you've got switches or DACMX, try it out, see what's available, see what you can do. I can tell you there's nothing for RF at the moment. I'm sorry for all. There's a difference between the notify and the filter event. So a filter event, well, it's probably easier to describe. The notify is something has happened in your computer. Somebody's clicked a button, somebody has walked over your front panel, whatever has happened, and LabVIEW is simply notified of it, and it can't stop that from happening, nor can it have any impact on how the rest of the computer behaves about that. It can only respond. A filter event is something like window close, and it's something that I use very often. And it's highlighted by that question mark, or a red arrow on the selection of the event. And I can show you that. So when I go here and I set up my event structure, I do this VI. So there's two different colors. For those of you who are colorblind, trust me. So, but you can see there are two different types of panel close. There's one with a question mark and one with an out. That's a notify, that's a filter event. The reason that's a filter event is that LabVIEW will be told that your panel has been closed, but the operating system goes ahead and takes care of closing that for you. And sometimes that happens at the loss of your program because you actually didn't want to lose the window. You wanted it to shut down gracefully. And so the filter event allows you to catch something, a mostly cooked event, and I'll get into this nomenclature of a cookery of events, but the basic idea is that before the operating system is allowed to do what it needs to do, or even the rest of LabVIEW needs to do what it needs to do, your event structure can now respond to that and, like I said, filter it out if need be. And lastly, there's the last type to talk about is this .NET and ActiveX event. You use a slightly different node to register for that, but you can actually have a VI, this callback VI, be invoked, brought up in the ether of LabVIEW without being on a diagram whenever a .NET or ActiveX event happens. So, once again. Okay, so now we're on to the funner part of the presentation. All of those things that you're wondering why. And this is one of those interesting ones. For those of you who can't read it, it says lock panel or defer processing of user actions until the case for this event completes. So I have, for a large part myself, almost ignored this. I just let LabVIEW do what it needs to do, and luckily it hasn't been me, but I was actually talking to a couple application engineers, and they're like, what is this? I don't even know why it's on, so I just always uncheck it for default. And so I actually went to R&D to make sure that I got the cardinal answer, and luckily Stephen Mercer was nice enough to tell me about that. So this was the hope and the dream of that option. So in this VI, what this does is every time I hit the button, I increment a number. When that number finally crosses over 6, disable and gray out that button so I can't get to 7. So the idea is that, let's see, well, I'll just go ahead and show this one working. But there's this delay that happens that I can keep clicking the button, I can do a happy dance on it while this is processing, right? So I'm going to go and you see it stops. Now I clicked on it, hopefully it was obvious that I did more than 6 times on there. I had enough coffee to make it happen. But what ended up happening is LabVIEW had a partially cooked event. All that LabVIEW knew is that there was a mouse down at this location on the screen. But it wasn't going to figure out more detail. It wasn't going to cook that event anymore because it was still inside that event structure. And what ended up happening is when I hit that number 6, I disabled and graded, and so when I was finally done processing that frame, it fully cooked the rest of the events in the system and said, there was a mouse down at this location, but that was on top of a disabled and grayed out button. And it doesn't process events for disabled and grayed out buttons. So the idea, if you didn't believe me, so once again, just the wonderful. So now we have the exact same structure. I didn't change anything except that one option. I didn't change anything except that one option on the structure itself. So the idea? And you can tell, obviously, I went well past that threshold. because LabVIEW fully cooked those events when they came into the system and you were still processing and you were in a state actually working on it. So that was the idea, that's the intent behind it. So when you can take it from there. Unfortunately, the big problem with that is if you can't read that, it says it doesn't work well with producer-consumer. And the difficulty with that is if you have an event structure up top in a loop just kind of catching stuff left and right, and then in your processing loop in the bottom in your queued message handler, that's where you're doing the enabling and disabling of your control. Well, you can be doing the happy dance, and it finishes processing that event structure, remember what that text says, until the case for this event completes, not until the processing loop and the action handler of this entire program completes. So you can kind of shoot yourself in the foot a little bit by trying to enable and disable controls unless you're doing all the processing for that event in that individual case. Okay, I don't know, these three these three datum, there we go, or these data, I've always I've never used them. I have never personally gone through and taken like all the advantage of them that I could, but I figured it's probably really good things in a presentation talking about everything you wanted to know, try to figure out what are those things about. So I went through and I figured it out, and the basic idea, in this very simple program, I have three different events. I have timeout, which is 250 milliseconds, mouse enter, and when I do a shortcut, get rid of menu. So when I right click and I ignore the menu. Those three things should fire this, and I'm just looking at the values. And when I do that, see that, right click, go away, so on and so forth. And so the basic idea is that let's go back to the block diagram. The time is a one-to-one correlation with the tick count of your system. It does not correlate to an absolute time, but you can do relative timestamps. And it's also from when the event actually happened. It happens to be that my button clicks and everything else are right next to each other. The timeout and everything else are right on top of each other, so there's no delta in those plots that you're seeing there. But the basic idea is that you get the tick count. It's handy for doing maybe this event happened, when was the last time it happened, and you can do kind of a millisecond delta between the two of them. The source and the type. Has anybody actually taken advantage of the source and the type in an event structure? If you can, I'm curious. Please, well, you said.
Well, I use it to actually find out which on the tab panel, which one I can walk through. So it's one of that use it to take the data out of it, and then delete my data up there.
But I'm talking about these specific three types. So he was saying that he takes the data from the event and tries to determine which one's which.
Yeah.
And absolutely, that's a design pattern I'll bring up a little bit later. But I mean the source, the type, or the time. Some other hands? Anybody? Yeah, please.
The source is the property node, you get the control name, then you decide how to handle it, just merge it together.
No, the source. Yeah, that's the control reference. I'm talking about whether it was a timeout, one of these, or one of these sources. Yeah, exactly. So, okay. So that answers my question that I always wanted to know. Does anybody use this?
Honestly, I haven't used them a lot, but one use case would be if you have multiple things you handle in one case, and you want to figure out which one is fine.
Yep. Right. So I mean, I guess absolutely. Exactly. I agree. That's like how you could use it. Yep. Talking something like that, pretty much.
Change the workspace.
Whatever happens there. Okay. So in any case, that's we now know what the data is about. We know when it comes in, and we can try to be creative to use it. Okay. This is one that's near and dear to me. Have you ever seen this? Has anybody ever seen a bunch of question marks inside of their event selectors? Those of us who do dynamic event registration often see this. So yeah, that is definitely that face. This is something. So this VI, very simply, I'm registering these four inputs, and all that I'm doing is getting that as the output on it. So it's pretty simple. The value change, I run it, so on and so forth. Nothing too fancy. But the interesting thing is, why is there a number 1 there? You can't see. And also, if I go ahead and I edit events handled by this case, why does it say string input 4? That is no relevant. The program works, right? So there's no bugs, so I can just ship it, right? So let's be a little bit more aware of what we're trying to do, and let's actually get it named something relevant. So now there's this bigger question, how? So we're going to figure it out. The basic idea is that this, I'll do that right. What I've done here is I have added effectively an empty array to an array. So this is pretty much a no-op, right? But if you remember when we actually brought up that dialog, what string did it have on there? The last one, exactly. And so what LabVIEW, in its infinite wisdom, will attempt to do in order to give you a good name of that array is take the name of the element, the last element in the array, which of course was string input 4. But now what I've done is I've actually given it the name that, if you can't tell, says list of strings. Now this is still jerked up, so we can't really change that, but now when I go here, edit events, you'll see now that I have list of strings. But that's not good enough, right? We want more. We want it all. And I don't blame you. So, the appropriate way to do it is you do this action, there we go, where you create your registry. You don't register, but you create the registry. And you create the registry with the appropriate names of things that you want. In this case, events are cool is the name of the string. That should be in my dialog that comes up. And better list of strings should actually be in that drop down when I'm actually just viewing my event structure. So it is, and there you go. There's a refresh issue with LabVIEW, so this is one of those, hey, why is it not right? Well, the reality is that it is right. It just didn't update the text because of, LabVIEW's trying to do a lot of stuff and it doesn't really matter. But now we have better list of strings value change, and when I right click and I go to edit events, you'll see I have my events are cool listed there as well. So now we know how to make that better, have it across the board.
If you run it, does it put string input? Does it overwrite the name? So last time when you went to the edit events, it had like the name of the last string.
There we go, right?
Maybe it just it keeps the initial definition because you created it
Yes.
without registering.
He registered nothing.
Yes.
But it kept the.
Oh, the
it kept
original
the
one.
name of, it defines the name the first time you register.
Yes. So,
I got it.
and that's still jinked up because once again it didn't refresh. So I don't know if that's what you're saying. Back to 1. But that's the gist. So now we've got a better idea. The short answer is, if you want your event structures with a better nameology, you need to have you need to create your registration up front with the right names, and then go ahead and add the references to the dynamic registration so that it shows up appropriately.
Norm, was the problem is that was an empty array or an unnamed array? Is that the problem?
Yes.
Isn't there a way that you can give that array a name after you build it? I think you. Is there a way? Can you build like a typecast it or something?
Oh yeah. Well, what I used to do is I actually used to have a terminal that I never showed on the front panel, and I used to take that, go into a local variable, and have the terminal feed into that. So I was only using a terminal and a local variable to do that pass through until I realized I should just be doing this forward registration. Mr. Staub.
Just right.
Staub engineering.
Thanks. Just right. You can use a typecast paren and do a named constant at the same time, and just cast from what it is to what it is with the name added on. But I think this is safer.
This is safe. Not this one.
I do the typecast trick. I like this more.
The typecast is okay, but what I've found that is handy instead of doing the typecast is that I like actually predetermining my registration up front with a bunch of constants, because usually when I want to collect all my references, it's somewhere else in my code that's more appropriate. And I usually have more screen real estate or more block diagram real estate at like an initialization. Yep.
So another technique that works is I have, for a VI that dynamically parses the front panel, I have a shift register with a null array of the data type where that null array is named properly. I add to that array and then do a single registration and it gets the correct name.
Yeah. It's pretty much the same thing. Yep. Yep. So, moving forward, little known features. So there's probably lots of WTFs that we need about events. Is Craig Smith in the room? Stephen Mercer in the room? Is any of LabVIEW R&D here?
I'm here.
Hey!
That's all.
Darn it. Well, Darren was part of the original sort of feature spec for some of the event stuff, right? Sometimes. So, but the people who actually know some of the cardinal answers, I would ask to be here. Maybe there's a good reason they're not here. Hopefully, what's that? They're all next door?
Well, no,
Oh, wait.
Greg is
Oh,
here.
hey. No, sorry.
I got one question for you.
Yep.
Back earlier, you showed event registration with the event registration node, and then you showed the ActiveX and .NET event registration with the callback PI.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, it was one of the...
Yeah, I love that. So,
Won't steal my thunder.
I don't know what your thunder is.
Is it a question?
It's a leading question. Can you use the event callback registration with anything other than .NET events?
That's a good question. I'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
Pay you to do that question.
Anyways.
If you'd have paid me, I'd have done it at the right time.
Perhaps that's one of the next things on the slide. So, registration of an array element. So some of the things that you've seen so far, I took an array of references, put them together, and now that one case was registered for everybody that was in that array. Kind of handy, little known feature when it first came out. Probably over the years people have figured it out. However, have you ever really wanted to respond to a specific event when you actually clicked on an array element?
Yes, I
Yes.
So, something that I don't know whether or not it's legal or not, but I sure as heck can do it. And I've done it before. Once again, I wouldn't put this like in a production test system that has the weight of the world on it. But in terms of having a really interesting effect, I have on the block diagram here an element dynamically registered for a mouse down event. Oh no, that's next part of the demo. There we go, for the mouse down event that we have right here. Come on. So that string is actually, if you click on the, click on the individual element, right click. See, the sad thing is I'm showing people R&D how to do this, and they're going to be like, oh, we need to get that into that LabVIEW. That's not good. But you can go ahead and create reference, and now I have a reference to that element. Now, not every event works when you do this. So this is probably why it's not really a published thing, because they can't make it work for everything, because that one reference represents all of the strings in the array. However, when you do get this, and I can't necessarily guarantee that the data will always be perfect, but I can tell you that this is exactly what I ran. I registered for it. When it gives me the reference, I can get that information out of it. Another thing that's kind of interesting that I think most people will probably have already thought of if you haven't. This idea where I scan a directory, and I can, based on when I click here, this is kayak polo. Something I do on weekends. But now I am actually clicking on this, and on the block diagram, I just go ahead and I get the value out of it, and I have a nice way of having a simple little image viewer. So, any comments on the legality of this from somebody who knows?
There's a potential race condition because by the time you are reading the value, you
Could have
may have
changed.
clicked somewhere else already.
Yep, okay.
So using the lock panel until handling is complete would
Be an interesting.
should alleviate that.
Okay.
I won't guarantee it, but
So there's a potential race condition, which I think we kind of always live with a lot of things. But there's also, like I said, if I were to go ahead and take this to string mouse down, and I did edit events handled, and I went to, what kind of event do I want to do here? I think if I did like mouse enter, mouse leave, doesn't work. Yeah, so that one doesn't work. Like I said, we're not talking perfection here, but you can have handy side effects. And hopefully LabVIEW doesn't do that too. Okay, this one is pretty slick. I like a lot. Bundling of user events and event registrations. Has anybody ever created a bundle of user events? Mr. Staub, anybody else in registrations? Ooh, look at you, fancy feet. All right, so most of you know this, maybe I'll just blast through it. But the interesting thing is that the naming is part of what gets quirky, and I'll also get into another one of the quirks of it that has the LabVIEW R&D people have decided to defer the request. The basic idea is that I have three dynamically registered events, just a string item, data, and data wrapper. So if I have a string item and I register it here, see string item, and all the names are working right because I've named them and done everything I needed to. And I can get string item as an element out right here. Wonderful. So if something else in my program, some other asynchronously running process fires an event, there's data that goes along with every user event, and the data of that user event is string, so I can get that string information. Fantastic. Well, how about if this is the data associated with the event? It's a cluster, a Boolean item and string item. Great. So I'm going to register that. Somebody else is going to send me this information. Happy hunky-dory. And when I go to add, I should be able to go ahead and get data for its individual elements out of this node, right? Fantastic. Well, it's not there. You can't do that because that's the way it works. But an interesting thing is, if you create a very simple wrapper around that and give that constant a name, so once again, all that I've done here is taken that and I've re-registered that to be there. So this is just a declaration of that wrapper around it. I can now do something where I have the individual element or specific items underneath it available to me. So once again, if you're making an API that is user event heavy, and you have a lot of data inside of these events that are clustered together, and you would like for somebody to be able to access the data in the structure like this, that's the manner in which you need to go about so you can actually get that cluster as a whole back to you as opposed to just the individual elements. Two questions, Joe? Well, there's a couple different things. This right here, okay, so there's three events that are available. There's data, user event. Oh, well, I guess all I was trying to originally I just had it like this. And I was just trying to show that. But then you lose the name. So
basically you're saying it just nested inside the cluster.
Yes, if you nest it inside another cluster, you can get the cluster you desire out, but then you have to give it a constant so that it can have the appropriate name in the event selection. Yep.
Any way of avoiding that, because what it seems to be just unconfused across the cluster situation. Any feature, any click or any button you press the option of that you have departing that, the unbundle, and you generate a bit with the cost of.
Avoid allowing the unbundle to even happen?
Yeah.
Make it a class. But no, the short answer is I do not know of one that can prevent the user from getting an individual element out and forcing them to have the whole thing. The only way, if that means that you want data encapsulation inside of a cluster-like structure that they can't get to the guts of, make it a class. That's what it is. I mean, it's not as easy as just having an option, I agree, but if you want that behavior, that's what I would recommend. Or just put a big sign in front of the sticky notes in front of the computer. Don't do this. So, another interesting thing, and this is something that the guys over at JKI actually do quite a bit, is they have these parts of the system, lots of asynchronously running actors, not necessarily actor frameworks, but each one of these nuggets here, each one of these, what do you call them in your systems? Processes, yeah, just processes running. They have effectively all available user events available as an output of one of the API calls to that thing. Say it's an instrument, or say it's a load cell, or a whatever. But the basic idea is, this is now part of an API for an instrument. But my program wants to respond to something of that type. And so what I can do is in the guts of this, or when I'm designing my API, all that I do is I just bundle all those user events together, give that bundle of all the user events out. And for those of you who raised your hands, you're probably not surprised. But now when I go in here and I right click and I edit events, you'll see that I now have an extra level in my hierarchy of events named appropriately, containing just the things that I actually care about for that specific device. And obviously you probably kind of figured out I've got one right up underneath it, so the next part of the demo. There's that. There's that. And now you can see we've got two things there. Now you can see that we have two things there. Once again, they're clustered, they're bundled together. It gives you logical, easy access to understand what's there. And it might not have been as dramatic to you because, you know, that pushed everything down off the page. But if I would have rearranged these items in here, that ability to collapse and uncollapse a section of user events is of particular usefulness. Because now, in order to get to the rest of it, I got to go all the way down. So that gives me the ability to nicely collapse these things. Question, yes?
Could you also show us how you could unregister one of these events?
Absolutely. I'm glad you asked. Actually,
You have bundle there, for instance, this home driver, I think, you have initialized,
oh, so
whatever. And imagine having initialization phase, unregistered, only this particular.
that actually is that's a very interesting point and a good point. So the question was, what about unregistering just one of those inside of the cluster? And because what we've done is up front, by doing this, by doing this, we have permanently, for the rest of the program, anybody that uses this wire has to use this exact same thing. There's no way for somebody to expand it out further. It is hard locked to whatever created this first. And the only way to unregister for an event, and I think I'll open up that one of the, nope. So if I wanted to take this VI that we had earlier where I'm changing the event registration from one thing to other things, if I simply put a null array in here, which you probably already know, I'm just going to do this for completeness so other people recognize it, to unregister everything for it, you simply put a null array into the input of it. But what about if I just wanted to stop being registered for the second element, which is I think closer to what you're saying, In this case, we're seeing an array. It's no different than a cluster, really. It's just a grouping that you really can't get individual access to here at that point. And the only way to unregister an individual one is to get all those references, null out the one that you want to unregister for, and then send that array or that cluster of references back in.
And what I also see examples where they bundle the reference to the event reference.
I'm glad that you brought that up. It's a very organic presentation. Like that right there.
Yeah, like that. You can unregister one of those, but I don't see anything to get to that.
Well, let me do one thing here. This information, you can get that information, and then from here, if I really wanted to, I would pretty much come down here and I would there. So that's about all I could say on trying to unregister for a very specific event. And you can't necessarily unregister. I don't know what would happen if you actually nulled out one of those in your system.
But you can also use unregistered for events.
Oh, the actual node.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. I'm really bad about.
This just branches your entire event structure.
Well, why are you telling us to do it? You just said it crashes. So when we actually do the unregister, it crashes?
Well, it does not crash, but it will cancel out all your events. That's what I've seen.
So, so which one is it? This one right here that you're talking about? Unregistered for events right there?
So you have in your bundle two events, and you unbundle one of them, say the first, and
Yep.
you unregister the first via this sub.
Everything goes down.
Everything is out.
Thank you. So the statement is, if you take this,
That's
inside
what
the structure, you unbundle it, you deregister it using that node, or you destroy the registry. See, that's the thing.
But that's what I've seen. I'm not sure if it's.
I think I understand why that might be happening, because you're destroying it, and you're not just giving it a null. And that might be part of it. And so what I'm hearing you say is you go here, you actually go through that of the overall thing. And so what I would say, maybe it hoses up the entire underpinning ecosystem. That's a very good thing to be aware of. Thank you for warning me about it. But, and the rest of us too, for that matter. But I would simply say, in that very scenario, I have a sneaking suspicion that this is a much safer operation. So if you want that behavior and you don't want to respond to that entire grouping anymore, I would say try that first, and you're probably more likely to have less problems. We'll go from there. Because I think what ends up happening is you've destroyed a reference that's used behind the scenes here. And so that possibly takes that entire event structure down. Yeah, oh, absolutely. But it shouldn't happen. It shouldn't happen. I agree. But did you call it in? Did you make a service request out of that one? One last point on the clustering of these events, something else that's relatively neat. It goes deep. You can actually continue to nest this down. All that I did was I took those two things, put them in another cluster, and put it there. But you can really get kind of crazy on your hierarchy depending on how many user events you've got and how you decide to name them and organize them and everything else. Tools for our belt, things we can use or not use, your choice. Lastly, naming of, so once again, it's all about trying to have things displayed appropriately. Something that we have here is, if I go inside of this structure to edit it, you'll see that even though I have two very different event registration green wires going into this, there's no difference, there's no delineation between those two here. I thought there was. I thought if you give that reference a specific name, you would see it represented here as another hierarchy. I thought that would be kind of slick, but you don't. That's one FYI, but one place where you do see a difference is actually here in the indicator. So if you can tell, I have this called user up top, this called inster. Right now it doesn't have a specific name. So what I'm going to do is actually go ahead and do one of these lower events, add event case, initialized, and you'll see the text says event registration number .rfesf events .initialized. So it kind of dots out the layers. You don't see the hierarchy in the other dialog, but you do see them dotted out here. And obviously this doesn't have any value to me as event registration ref num dot whatever. So it's very important that you go ahead and put a constant on it. And now you'll see that that very explicitly changed. Now I have user and inster dot whatever. So once again, ways to get around that so you can see it both. Okay, so enough on that one, unless anybody else wants to spend more time on it. Okay, good. Thanks. And this is the neat one. This is one that I've been warned about, but it's really, really neat in terms of power user kind of feature events, where you can actually use callback events with LabVIEW stuff, not ActiveX and .NET. So, give me a second. There's actually, FYI, there's a car I need to file in 2013. I think there's some kind of issue with this. Maybe they stopped me from doing it in 2013. I'm not sure. But in 2012, it definitely still works. I have a VI here that when I run it, and I run it, and I run it. Nice LabVIEW. It's a pretty LabVIEw. There you go. Oh, I'm sorry. It's okay, LabVIEW. No. Okay, so basically I'm doing mouse overs and I'm changing my plot when I do mouse overs. So normally you would figure somewhere on my block diagram I have a loop with an event structure, and that event structure is registered for those three things, and when it changes I get a control reference to the plot that I just moused over and I change properties. The reality is this is my block diagram. Ignore the event structure down there. There's nothing in it except that button that we're going to get to in a second. But the reality is that this is all that I have. This is the only thing in a loop, and I've done dynamic. I have dynamically registered for those individual VIs for those LabVIEW events. So I have no loop, and inside those callback VIs, I've got a little bit of poor form over here. Sort of, I'm not quite sure if I like it over here to the left or to the right. Looks prettier over to the right. I'm going to go with it over there for now. But that's all that I have. That is my entire callback VI. So when LabVIEW sees this event happen, it kicks alive this VI, it gives it a reference to the chart, it gives it a reference to some other information, and some other common data, and then that's it. These VIs run totally asynchronously, unmanaged. They can run, I believe, in parallel, so you can have tons of them all stacked up. If I put like a 250 millisecond wait in this guy, and he was re-entering it, would kick off another one for everybody that's going there. It's neat, it's handy, it's also very dangerous because we're absolutely breaking data flow in this case. We have absolutely kicked data flow to the curb because now we have things just asynchronously running off in the background without anybody watching them actors. And so it's potentially dangerous because we can't find them. But in terms of really neat things, so I guess here's a reasonable idea of when this would be okay to use. Your user has created this abomination. Let's presume there's a lot more wires all over the place. And you want to add some functionality to his program. But you don't want to screw with his event structures. You don't want to, you don't want to mess with his event structures. You don't want to get anything in there. So you want to do as little modification as possible, but still be able to respond to whatever's going on in the system. It's a very slick way of adding functionality with minimal impact to the overall system itself. Assuming that, well, here's in 2013, I can do this in 2013. This is cool. This breaks. So I think that might have been something that was done explicitly. I'm not sure. We'll find out in a second. Would you like to comment?
That's news to me. I wish someone would have filed a bug report.
Found out about it in a presentation on Sunday, so.
So Is it hard to make the connector pane for those VIs?
Thank you very much. So, can somebody give me an event? Any events? Give me an event. Seriously, guys, ladies. Scroll wheel. Cheeky. But the basic idea is, okay, so I'm going to go ahead and take these, register them for mouse scroll wheel. Not gonna find it. You did that on purpose. I'm going to go ahead and just do a shortcut menu dismissed. So the basic idea is that, how would I make that VI that gets called? Remember, there were 3 controls on that front panel. Well, that connector pane and those controls are very intimately and statically linked to your choices and what you wire into that node right there. Let me simplify it by getting it all by itself out here. So, the way that you create that VI is not willy-nilly new VI. You actually right-click on it, create callback VI. That is something that you have to very explicitly do. It will make a VI with the proper connector pane, with the appropriate references stuck on your VI. And now that VI is made, and now you can have those references. Now something that's very interesting and unique is that, see how this is a variant down there? Remember on the other VI it was a reference. Well, if I'm here and I say, you know what, whenever that happens, I want to fire this user event. You see that reference just broke. If I go ahead and right-click, create callback VI, it's changed that from a variant to a user event. So it's potentially fragile because if you change something, then you've got to go either change or remake a VI potentially. But now whenever I fire that, or very similar down here, one of those things that you can do as well is it also responds to user events, if I haven't already mentioned that. And so now, when I call this VI over here, what I do is I take that array of references that when I do the registration of it, that's when I have the references that I know I'm going to have to respond to some other point in my program. So I feed it into the registration, and that registration holds on to that data. It holds a copy of that data. In this case, it's a bunch of references. And so it holds on to it, and every time that event gets fired, not only does it send the event data to it, it stores a copy, or it sends a copy of whatever that data that was the registration node was given at the beginning. Make sense? So when I do this, and let's go ahead and use that. And so now when I run this, I do the mouse over, and I'll do the print. Now this is a very interesting kind of gotcha too. But the basic idea is I could have in that VI, when I fire the event, that's right. When I go to that callback VI, I'm going to take that path. I go there, save, close, run, doing its deal, hit the print, and I go, and you'll see that the file was made. So when I'm sorry, that was not the registration up front, that was, oh yeah, that's right. So it took these references that I passed in at the beginning and it used them later down the road. So I didn't actually have to pass the references into my event data. So now your events not only have event data, it also has metadata that it was given at registration. That's a good way to think about it. So one gotcha about this, which is kind of interesting. I'll ask you about this node. In LabVIEW, not using this black magic trickery, when I fire that node, does it wait for an event structure to catch it, execute it, and complete? No. It just done. Well then why, when I hit the print button, there's a path, that's right. I have to force it to stay open. Why did that VI stop? It has to wait for the callback to finish. I have mixed emotions with this. Personally, I like the idea of the callback just going, everything else just continuing. Some people like this idea that that node now blocks until that callback VI completes. You know what it does now, you want to know, right? You can make up your mind as to whether you like it or not, or how you use it or not. But now that call, that generate user event, will explicitly be a blocking call until that callback VI comes back from the queue. Okay, so, yes.
So just one question about that. I recall a long time ago reading that you aren't supposed to do that. You aren't supposed to use that event callback for any of the aspect of that. But we saw the reason why, or was there like,
So the question was, I thought we were told never to do this. Don't do that, that's bad. When I first realized that I could do that just by dinking around, I felt very dirty. I felt like I had done something wrong and found something that I shouldn't have. So I went to R&D to actually very explicitly ask, is this okay? And I didn't necessarily get like the most hearty, oh heck yeah! But I also, I think, they say in the documentation, don't, because I think it's just one of these, it breaks paradigm and it's underutilized, and LabVIEW R&D's got a lot of stuff to worry about as opposed to things that probably only 3 people in the world try to do. So if there's some grand use case that you think enables it, well, that's a different story and there's discussions that can happen, but is there a more official answer you'd like to give?
For the most part, we feel like the structure gives the better programming paradigm because you have access to terminals and your other controls more directly. So we steer people toward that. The callback was largely introduced to avoid issues with .NET and ActiveX events that can be re-entered. So while handling an event, you can actually trigger another event. And so that guided some of the gotchas that happened with the callback VIs.
Sorry. Apologies. Okay, so it's possible, it's there. Using event structure is, I think, the official answer. But obviously you can see that there's some value behind it. So the last slide to finish off, what am I supposed to go to? Probably like 12 minutes ago. So I got, it's a great picture. I got to yesterday and I'm trying to figure out, I could do this, or I could do that, or I can do that, and now I tried to figure out if I was indecisive once and I couldn't make up my mind, so I decided instead of doing a lot of one of those, I kind of put a smattering up there. So those of you who'd like to go, you can. If not, I have this idea, or we can pick one. Which one of these things would you like for me to spend a little bit of time talking about? First person, there we go. Okay. It's like the most uninteresting one of them all, but it is relatively quick. The short answer is, or the misconception is, you can only have one event structure in your entire VI hierarchy, because if it doesn't, black holes will suck open the world and kill kittens. It's bad, right? The reality is no, it's absolutely false. You can go ahead and I think, what do I do here? Mouse over, mouse enter, mouse down. So, boom, right? Nothing bad happened in this. I'm getting there, I'm getting there. There we go. Now that'll work. So,
Kittens are dying.
Kittens are dying right now, absolutely. So the short answer, okay, so I'm going to talk about how it was supposed to go. It was supposed to stop right there and everybody was happy, and not necessarily afraid to have more than one structure. And then I was going to go into how it can be dangerous, and it's just, the reason people say don't do it, like from core 1, core 2, standpoint, and it seems like a lot of people are not core 1, core 2 individuals in terms of training in this room, is because you can end up in scenarios like this, where you think stuff's supposed to happen and it doesn't. But by de facto, having 2 instructions in there doesn't break anything. It doesn't screw anything up. And it will respond multiple event structures registered for the same thing. And every event structure has a queue behind it. Actually, I believe it actually uses the same guts of the LabVIEW queue behind, like the guts that the LabVIEW queue uses underneath the event queue uses as well, to actually queue up these semi-cooked and mostly cooked and quasi-cooked events behind the scene. So there's a queue here, a queue here, a queue here, a queue here, a queue here. When the event system actually goes through, mouse down, what is it over? Who is registered for this event that just happened after I cooked it? It sends the data out to everyone. And so that's okay. Where you get into potential problems is with these filter events. The filter events is where stuff gets really jinky, and that's why I was just running into issues with everything here, because I have a couple filter events down here at the bottom. Let me just go ahead and get rid of that sucker right there. And then that worked, because I registered for the button push and the X in the upper right-hand corner of everything there. So, long story short, it can work. And another thing that is often seen is I can't put events in a sub-VI because that's bad and kittens will die. The reality is that is absolutely blatantly false. I love to do it all the time for my brat VIs. If you haven't ever heard, brat VI is a child VI that takes control of the parent. And that's what I've done here. I have a reference to something on the parent. I register for it. And now this VI that runs in the background, go ahead and just kind of have this up here. Resize this here. So you see that it also responded to the parent's events. And I like to do that quite a bit because what it does is if now your event structure in your program can be contained to lots of stuff that your program's going to do. You can Plato code it all you want. But now you can have a nice little module sitting in your code that handles just one thing, like mouse over, or perhaps even scroll wheel. And I will stop on that last little part. Actually, I should probably respect your time and let you all go. So I apologize. I thank you very much for listening. And yeah, it's very good to have you here. You are all excellent questions, and I think I blame you all for the reason why I went over. 4, more event love. Wirebird Labs, Jack Dunaway is doing user events, tips, tricks, and sundry. It is not a repeat of what I just did. There's some overlap, but he's got a lot of really good content. And then also Mike Leotis making the most of new user event features in LabVIEW 2013, including scripting, a la other stuff. I would strongly, strongly, strongly recommend if you like this stuff, go to those. So once again, Wirebird Labs and JKI. Yeah, thank you for your time.